boats set sail with youth program, and internationally, Spanish family killed in New York City helicopter crash. Now for the details. Youth Minister Foster Cummings is calling for more positive media coverage of Barcelona Street as he launched the recommissioned Youth Development Center yesterday. Cummings criticized the media for focusing on crime, but moments later urged residents to stop killing each other. He emphasized that solving crime is a collective responsibility and encouraged the community to value the facility and use it for progress. The center will offer training in trades like welding, IT, and cosmetology. The Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha is distancing itself from politics, declaring it is not aligned with the UNC or any political party. This comes after speculation linked the group to recent remarks by UNC leader Kamla Prasad-Visesa about purging political nepotism. SDMS General Secretary Vijay Maharaj said the group has always been a religious and cultural body. He clarified that former UNC MP Dinesh Rambali's resignation was a personal decision, not a political fallout. Young people in San Fernando are learning to navigate more than just the sea. A new partnership between the Scout Association and the Southern Sailing Academy is teaching sailing and life skills to youth. At a recent awards event, San Fernando Mayor Robert Paris praised the initiative, saying scouting shaped his own discipline. Organizers say the program builds resilience, environmental awareness, and confidence. Internationally, tragedy in New York. 6 people, including 3 children, have died after a tourist helicopter crashed into the Hudson River. The victims were a family from Spain and their pilot. The helicopter lost control shortly after takeoff and flipped before crashing. Simons confirmed the parents were company executives. The FAA and NTSB are investigating the cause. U.S. and Spanish leaders have extended condolences. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Naomi McNish. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
Hello, everybody. Welcome once again. This is 10 questions here on WESN. I'm Andy Johnson. Let's tell you what's happening. Why are we talking about this? Let me just read something for you. As the world marks International Women's Day 2025, the global community also reflects on the 50th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. They call it Beijing Plus 30. Adopted in 1995 at the 4th World Conference on Women, this landmark agreement set the stage for gender equality and women's empowerment worldwide. From March 10 to 21, 2025, the 69th Commission, well, it did meet on the status of women, and they will convene at the United Nations headquarters in New York to assess progress and challenges in implementing the Beijing Declaration. Well, that happened. For Caribbean women, and especially for women in Tobago, these discussions hold significant relevance as they continue to strive for gender equity, economic inclusion, and political representation. It was headlined Beijing Plus 30 and the CSW 69. The CSW, the Convention on the Status of Women, and there have been 69 commissions on that in the period. Well, Terry Dale Ince is in Trinidad and Tobago. She is a change agent and a human rights advocate, and she was at those talks in New York a couple of weeks ago. We're talking about our gender agenda in Trinidad and Tobago, what has happened with it. In a discussion we had while she was in New York at those meetings, she said one of the things she pointed out is we still don't have a gender agenda in Trinidad and Tobago. We want to start with that. Good to see you.
Good morning, Andy.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. And you're head of the office in Trinidad for CEDAW, and it's called...
So I am the founding director and convener of the CEDAW Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. And the question would be, what is the CEDAW? What is CEDAW?
Yeah.
And CEDAW is a convention for the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. It is the most signed and ratified UN convention, and Trinidad and Tobago ratified that convention in 1980. With ratification became responsibility. So what are the responsibilities? It's a number of them, and the article and the convention consists of 17 substantive articles, which speaks to the development of women and girls in this country. And why is that important as we are talking about commemorating the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action?
Yeah.
And that's because the Platform for Action, the 12 key areas of the Platform for Action, aligns with the 17 articles of the convention. And so when you cannot look at one without the other. It's all about developing 50+% of our population worldwide, not only in Trinidad and Tobago. And this 50% are women and girls, and everything that includes. So we need to really focus on what types of progress our country has made, our region has made over these past 30 years. What are we really celebrating or commemorating? But more importantly, what are the gaps so that we can address those gaps? And one last thing I would add, you mentioned the 2030 agenda.
Yeah.
What is that? Well, we all know about the SDGs, right? The Sustainable Development Goals. We know there are 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals.
Right.
And if you look at those Sustainable Development Goals, such as eradicating poverty, ensuring clean water, I'm paraphrasing, justice, climate justice, etc., education. Again, you see the alignment between the Sustainable Development Goals, the Beijing Platform for Action, those 12 key issues that came out of Beijing in 1995, and the articles of the CEDAW Convention. So I make that statement to say with the Sustainable Development Goals, there's 5 more years to attaining it. The 2030 agenda, we're in 2025. So we have 5 more years for attaining those 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We have 30 years now that we are commemorating the Beijing Platform for Action, the 12 key areas, women in education. How are women in education doing today? Women's autonomy, women in politics, and this is a perfect time to speak about that. How have we done as a country, but how are we doing as a region? How are we doing as a world in those areas? And again, how do they align with the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which Trinidad and Tobago ratified in 1980.
All right, so in 2025, where are we?
It depends on what you're asking about, which one of those areas you're asking. In some places, we've made tremendous progress. And if you are to look back at where we began, in 1995, and I thought about this actually, what was I doing in 1995? Well, I was in the middle of my master's program. And I volunteered a lot. I was outside of Trinidad, of course, and doing that work. But I really wasn't thinking about the women who, from Trinidad and Tobago, who actually from our region, who were actually at that time in Beijing advocating for my right to get a higher education, for my right, for my body autonomy, for my right to be able to make a decision to enter politics if I chose, to be representative of my country if I chose, to have access, not to be given anything, but to have access, equal access like everyone else. That is what those women were doing while I was taking advantage of it.
But it didn't mean that those things weren't happening before that. But but we made some commitments to address them frontally, and yeah. And when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, and you'd said that come to think of it, 30 years later, we don't have a
agenda policy. Yes.
So.
And the question then is, do we really need one? Because in 30 years, well, the gender policy would have come out of the CEDAW Convention. It's one of the first responsibilities of the country once they ratify the convention is to prepare or to put forth a gender policy. So what is a gender policy? We know in the large scale, it's a framework for, again, ensuring equal access for the other 50% plus of our population. Have we done anything in the apps? Do we have a gender policy?
Right, but you say we don't.
We do not, as we would expect to see one on paper. This is the policy, these are the things that we ought to be following. Have we done anything under that framework? Yes. Do we have a framework of a gender policy? Absolutely. There's one, the last I read, it was 2018, there was a green paper in cabinet. I'm not sure the color of the paper today, but I do know that, or I'm aware that there is that framework. And just at a very high level, the Ministry of Planning has responsibility for that framework, and the Ministry of Gender Affairs has the responsibility for implementing the tenets of the framework. So what does the framework entail? Well, it entails things like gender mainstreaming, ensuring that gender,
a lot of people wouldn't recognize what that should mean when you talk about gender mainstream.
Correct. So gender, the idea of the understanding of gender, meaning when you think of doing anything, for instance, if you're even planning a new street, you are upgrading your street, any street, pick a street in Trinidad and Tobago, it needs to be upgraded. Are you considering how that upgrade will impact men and women equally? Men don't wear heels, women do. So if you update that street very beautifully with those little holes throughout, aesthetically it looks nice. But every time a woman in a heel is on that street, she either has to remove her shoes and use a flat sole shoes, or run the risk of falling, hurting herself, or just ruining her shoes.
Is that what people refer to as granular issues? We get granular.
It's granular, but it makes sense, and here's why. Because if you're considering that you are thinking about the gender component, the aspect, the impact of this on all genders in your society, and I just want to say at this point that gender is not just male and female. Right, we know that. Gender is a spectrum, male and female, women and men, there's a biological, right?
Yeah.
Gender is a spectrum, but it's a spectrum. However, when you look at the gender policy, it specifically says male and female, women and men. So it narrows the policy, the framework that is on paper right now, narrows gender to those two aspects. We'll come back. That's a different discussion. But so we're going to talk about those two, male and female. So yes, you must think about the entire population when you're making those kinds of decisions from a development perspective.
Yeah. You said you want to come back to the issue of gender, because I think in the world today, there's more than male and female, right? Although I see a certain president is trying to bring it back there because of whatever his policy thinking is. And you're talking here about the concept known as LGBTQI+.
Everybody. The concept is we're a human race. For me, it's about humanity. It's about all of us who make up our society. And we are all human beings. And so if we start with that premise, we don't have to get as granular as you just pointed out, because we're doing things to ensure that every human being feels valued and included. So you don't have to separate. But when you don't do that, when you purposefully create these silos, then everyone has to raise their hand and say, well, you forgot about me. How about me?
And you think that there's sufficient of the political will to address these things in the way that they ought to be addressed? Because in one of our discussions leading up to this, you said that one of the things that must happen is that there must be engagement of the spiritual community, of the religious community in the society to get buy-in from that. And perhaps in states like ours and governments like ours, that is an area where they would go probably only with a massive push, which is one of the reasons why we don't have a gender policy after 3 decades.
Right. It's possible. I think it's good to ask those questions of those communities who are resisting. What are we afraid of? As a behavioral specialist, I can tell you that change is very difficult. Change is not easy because we don't acknowledge that we make change every single day. Every day we wake up is not the same. We're making tiny changes along the way, but we're not acknowledging those tiny changes because it doesn't really change the direction or impact how we go about our daily lives. We change our clothes every day, that's a change, but we don't acknowledge it. That doesn't take anything away from us. But when you're talking about a societal shift, right? When it's a consciousness that we're all not at the same level. We have to understand that, and we have to accept that. And then we have to say, okay, how do we get from here to there? What are we afraid of? And how do we address those fears? And it's all through education, because there's nothing to be afraid of. The reality is we have been operating in a world, in a society of fluid genders for all of our existence, right? We have been. No one was talking about it as openly. And that is the fear. That is what, I think that is what is causing all of the angst now, because those of us, or those people who felt marginalized, are now speaking up, and they want to be recognized. And that is scary to some people. It shouldn't be, because those people were always there. So it's just a matter of saying, okay, you're my neighbor, you're my son, you're my cousin, you're my whomever. You're operating in the world just like I am. And we're all part of the human race. So let's treat each other as part of the human race.
But you think, generally speaking, there's if not an absence of will, certainly an absence of courage to go in some of these directions. And it's not only in Trinidad and Tobago. In different parts of the world, when we talk about the region, the Caribbean region, that seems to be, to cross that hurdle appears to be a difficulty for some people in decision-making positions.
Again, I go back to what I just said. I think it's a matter of doing what we're comfortable with. And if we're comfortable staying over this side of the fence, walking this way, very few of us will venture in the opposite direction. I will make a quick example to the don't ask, don't tell policy that was implemented during the Clinton administration in the US. I remember it because I was studying at the time. And I remember the pushback that got, but then it worked. But then, there were people who were saying, well, you're really still keeping people quiet. But the point was, he's saying, I don't need to know your business.
And that is what it should have meant to begin with.
Exactly.
Rather than people remaining, as they say, in closets and so on.
So I bring it to Trinidad, and I would suggest that we have been operating in a don't ask, don't tell environment all our lives.
Yeah. One of the things you talked about when we had a sort of preparatory discussion, you said that rather than having a Ministry of Gender Affairs, there should be some gender awareness machinery in every ministry.
So not rather than, but in addition to.
Okay.
And I would say for the most part, the Ministry of Gender Affairs has attempted to do that, and still are attempting to do that. And what I meant by that is, for instance, I used the example of a gender focal point, because you asked the question earlier, or you suggested that people may not know what gender mainstreaming is. Well, if and you're absolutely right. There's a simplistic version, but then there's a lot of mechanics behind it that has to ensure that the mechanism works within the different ministries. So it may look different in a Ministry of Sports, for instance, than it would look in the Ministry of Trade and Industry. But if you have a gender focal point, a person whose purpose in each ministry is to understand what gender is, the tenets of it, what the convention says, what we've signed on to as a country, what we ought to be doing, and ensuring that in every policy that's being implemented in each one of those ministries, and even quasi-ministries, that there's the gender component is addressed, then we would be making so much progress with this. It would no longer be this enigma, this thing that we have to do, because we'll be doing it. And I would suggest that in some cases it's already being done, but no one is aware of it because it's not being spoken about. And I think that is something that needs to be done as well. The Office of the Prime Minister Gender Affairs Division can do more about what they have done in those spaces of gender. So to go back to your original question about the gender policy, In the absence of agenda policy, a whole framework that everybody understands is the policy for Trinidad and Tobago, and everybody meaning private sector, public sector, quasi-private, everyone is marching from those, singing from that hymn book. In the absence of that, so many policies have been enacted to ensure that gender is on the agenda. But we don't know it. We don't know all of it unless you're actually working in this space, because it's not in a cohesive way. It's not being amplified so that Joe and Jane public is aware that this is how it affects me as an individual. This policy that the public sector, that the Gender Affairs Division or the Ministry of Finance or whatever ministry it is has put out. This is how I, in the private sector, in my operations, my organizations, will ensure that I'm meeting the tenets of that gender policy. Recently, last year, the National Action Plan for Strategic, it's a long title, but it's around sexual harassment, sexual violence, I'm sorry. That was actually implemented. The National Plan of Action Against Gender-Based Violence was enacted through the Office of the Prime Minister. That's huge. It's never been done in Trinidad and Tobago before. And the reason I say that it's huge, because my understanding is that there is a budget attached to it. So it's not just a paragraph in a nice glossy book with an asterisk next to it, but there's a budget which suggests that there is opportunity for resource mobilization to ensure that what's in that National Plan of Action is actually implemented. People are going to be trained. People are going to better understand what their roles are and how it affects the other policies or other policies that will come in the future, and also the policies that are currently in place. What has to be changed to make sure that these things are all aligned? So it means that there's an attention that was not there before that's now being placed as it pertains to violence against women or gender-based violence. Yeah. But it should be for everything. It should not just be for that one thing.
But will that not go into the bag where there are, for generations, for decades, statements of intent and frameworks for doing this, that, or the other, and these things get stuck somewhere, and every now and then it will be taken out and shaken in front of us, and then go back, and decades will pass before meat on the bones begins to be obvious.
Well, that's where you and I come in, and the greater public. When we're aware that these things exist, then we need to start holding the duty bearers to account. Okay, you signed this great policy, you did this launch and it looked good and it's on Instagram and everywhere else. Now, how is it impacting me in my daily life? I am still going to work every day and being harassed. So how is it translating there? What policies would my company now be forced or encouraged to change so that I don't feel threatened every day? They can't do anything about me walking there because that's public space, right? But when I'm on their property, I shouldn't feel threatened. They should have a responsibility to ensure that I don't feel threatened. So how does that policy translate there? I know, by the way, you and I on the street now, if I am aware, we're aware that these things, there's something, I don't like punitive, right? But there's something associated with behavior, and we are trying to change behavior. You and I are talking about it on the street. This is what you're doing every day. When the schoolgirl walks by, and she ought to be going to school, but you're saying things to her that you shouldn't be saying as a grown man. When your friend hears you say it, they should be saying, bro, let's not do that.
I think one of the ways of addressing it and sort of putting substance to it is that some of these things will have to be declared as against the law, and therefore people who are accused of it can be taken to court.
we can't legalize morality, I don't think. Everything doesn't have to be against the law. Some things should just be innate. I mean, some things you know better. We are all adult people in this world. Well, not all of us are adults, but
enough of us who are adults.
Right. From an adult perspective, and we should know better. Some of the things we do, like you said, yes, it's out of habit. It's out of from what we've always done. We've always see other people do it, and everybody laughs about it, and it's a joke, and we do it. But in our deepest recesses, do we really want that behavior being meted out to our daughters, our cousins, our nieces, as they pass by? Do you want your 40-year-old friend to be saying that to your 12-year-old goddaughter? You don't. So the point I'm making is that a lot of the things that are not being done, really we know that we know the right thing to do. But because no one is amplifying what the right things are, the things that are being, what we're amplifying, we're making a joke out of the wrong things. It's picong, it's fun, and we're making those things okay. And that's what has to change. We have to stop making bad behavior okay. We have to stop accepting mediocrity as standard. We have to stop. Because that's not the country I grew up in. That's not the country I know that when I went to high school, that's not the country. So I feel that there are little things that we can do, all of us can do, as citizens of this country that love this country, that wants to see the country continue on the trajectory that it was on when I was in high school, just a few years ago.
Yeah.
But we feel that, and we have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and everybody in between that we feel can really benefit from that wonderful country that we all remember. So we need to get back there somehow. And that includes bringing our faith-based communities with us. Because we all want the same thing, a better country for all of us.
But there are arguments from sect to sect as to how we go about it,
Yes.
what to take on board,
Yes.
and what maybe, I'm not sure if it will fit in this case, but some people believe some of these things are sacrilegious.
Yes, and there's always going to be that. So that's why we always have to continue having these conversations. And you have these conversations in various spaces, right? This is one of them, and thanks to you for giving civil society an opportunity to engage in this kind of dialogue, but also raise issues that sometimes people prefer not to be raised, particularly in an election month. But this is the kind of questions that need to be asked of our candidates. What's your position on issues that impact women? How do you plan to address those issues, not from a party perspective, but from a policy perspective? When you are elected, you are now Minister of XYZ. Forget the party. How are you going to now advance a policy that ensures equal access for all of your citizens? How do women benefit from you being a minister versus someone else? Those are questions that need to be asked.
And it doesn't seem that discussions of that sort tend to feature at all far more high up on the agenda of whoever is seeking the franchise, seeking to renew it, or
Right.
seeking to return to it, and
Right.
so on.
So again, I think that's our fault. Ours meaning Joe and Jane Public, civil society. Anybody who's in this space needs to be, if you're attending a town hall meeting, or you're just walking down the street and you run into a person who extends their hand and shakes it and says, I'm such and such, I'm running for X in this constituency, and then the question you should ask that person is, nice to meet you, I am such and such, and what do you plan on doing for women and girls when you become whatever it is you're running for? And that's a valid question, it's a serious question, and you should demand a serious response. And so as civil society operative, as the CEDAW Committee of Trinidad and Tobago, we plan on doing just that. You may recall in 2020, during the 2020 election, we had a series of conversations We did it via Zoom, where we invited candidates to come on and tell us who they are, introduce themselves to the general public, whoever is listening. And then we asked them some specific questions. Well, we're doing the same thing again over the next course of these weeks, to give candidates an opportunity to do just that, to tell us who they are, what they plan to do, not just for their constituency, but for the country. Because when you become a minister of a specific portfolio, you have now expanded, right, beyond your constituency. You're now supposed to be shepherding that you're supposed to be putting policies in place within that ministry that will impact all the people of the country, not just your constituency.
I made a note of one of the things you said in our preparatory discussion, that we are living in regressive times, and things like these sort of suffer because of that.
Yeah. Yes, and we refer to it kind of briefly already, and you referenced some of the policies that were changed in other parts of the world, like the DEI,
yeah,
and the demand that be taken out of every single department, organization, country, policy that's going to be doing business with this particular entity. That's how it hurts us, because...
And just for those who probably still don't know, DEI, I mean diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Exactly.
And in one major country in the world, they want to wipe that out.
Correct. Should that be allowed? That is regressive. In 2025, is that where we're going? And as a country, a sovereign nation, should we be told what to do in our sovereign nation as it pertains to diversity, equity, and inclusion? And what happened to discipline, tolerance, and production?
And production, yeah.
If you look at those three words and those other three words, isn't it kind of the same thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
But some people would have different meanings for them.
Yeah, so let's have a conversation about that. And let's talk about what have we gained over the decades of operating under discipline, tolerance, and production. What have we gained under the DEI policies? And do we really want to wipe out all of those gains? Do we really want to do that in 2025? And what do we tell our 10-year-old, our 15-year-old, exactly, about that? Those are the questions, hard questions to raise and discuss, of course. But we must have those discussions. We must. As a society, we must.
All right. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for the discussion. But we have to keep talking.
I thank you for that, and really want to do one more thing.
Yeah.
Again, we, in the vein of how we started, the Beijing Plus 30 commemoration, we, a coalition of organizations in Trinidad and Tobago, have decided that we need to do a little bit more than just commemorate it with International Women's Day or even International Women's Month, which is March. So we have determined that what we can do is do a series of public awareness, education, whatever you call it, actions between March. We started in March, and we will end in September, which is when the Beijing conference, fourth conference occurred in Beijing. And throughout these months, each month, we'll be doing things to raise awareness, to educate people around the Beijing Platform for Action. What has happened? Where are the gaps? How's Trinidad and Tobago doing? How is our region doing? How's the world doing? Last month, March, we had International Women's Day, etc. This month, thanks to our country, we're focusing on the elections because it's an election month for us. So we're doing a series of interactions with our candidates. We'll be also looking at things like femicide in our country and our region. And we will cap it off in September with a national report which encapsulates all of the things that we've done over the course of those 6 months. Okay. So thank you for allowing us to launch that today. Yeah. And we're also putting out the call for any other organization who wishes to join us can do so by calling Terry at 489-2185 or Jackie at, and I don't have a number off the top of my head, but we can give you that information.
Certainly, we will keep checking on.
Please,
on
yes, we have to. And this conversation, like you said, must continue.
Thank you very much, Terry Davis. Well, that's been our broadcast for this edition of the program. I'm Andy Johnson. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
WESN.
I am Dr. Delphina Ovid, your friendly neighborhood dentist. At Community Hospital Dental Clinic, we offer examinations which include x-rays, basic oral cancer screening, and a treatment plan. We also offer cleanings, fillings, extractions, root canal treatment, and complete and partial